In the past decade, we've seen a shift. More people than ever are openly neurodivergent, an umbrella term that includes ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and more. Studies have indicated that this is in part attributed to the advocacy work and improved screening that is generally permeating the universe here. But the main factor in the uptick is the fact that clinicians now recognize a wider spectrum of traits as neurodivergence. Improved diagnostic tools and reduced stigma both play a role. In the neurodivergent community, an analogy widely used to explain the difference between neurodivergent and neurotypical brains is that of operating systems. Both compute, but in different, unique ways. Today, we'll talk about the magic of that.
Yeah, that's right. And we've also, I guess, seen a shift recently in hiring that reflects this new awareness. Some businesses are focusing more explicitly on hiring neurodivergent people. I recently learned about a case study in the US called Ultranauts, which is an engineering firm, a world-class engineering firm that is founded by two MIT engineers, where they have an explicit mission to demonstrate that neurodiversity is a competitive advantage for business. And 75% of their team is neurodivergent, and they have completely reimagined the workplace so that all neurotypes thrive. That's a really interesting example. Today, we're going to be chatting with Amy Foxwell, who comes from our certified Moodle integration ReadSpeaker. And Amy presented on this very topic at our global Moot event in Scotland last year. So welcome, Amy, to tell us a little bit more about it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so before we dive in, let's have a little bit of the background. Let's hear the origin story. What drew you to this work personally? What keeps you passionate about it?
Okay, well, I've been working in ed tech for a really long time. And when this opportunity came up about 12 years ago to work with ReadSpeaker and text-to-speech 12 years ago was really, very cutting edge. I was always into kind of innovation and how we can use innovative technology for education. So I started diving in, and when I started researching it, I realized that, it touches so many more people. And like we've said, now with our understanding of the brain, we realize that neurodiversity is actually more prevalent than we think. And so I actually started seeing it around me. I'm an American living in France, raising bilingual children. And even in that context, I saw that, this was something that was outside of the standard. They were learning a bit differently. So then I just got very interested in it. And I've seen over the past 12 years this revolution, and I do believe we're in a revolution of education. And I think neurodiversity is a huge part of that revolution. So that makes me very passionate and, dare I say, having a lot of fun in it to understand better, to work in this area.
I'm really excited to talk about this today. I actually recently got diagnosed in the last year and a half as neurodivergent myself with ADHD, and explains a lot. Coming to that diagnosis later in my life has really helped me in my workplace, honestly. Dan can attest to that. Dan, quick confirmation?
No comment.
Okay, so let's get serious. One of the stats you shared kind of stopped me in my tracks. 85% of UK students and 70% of neurodiverse employees don't disclose like I just did. And I'm sitting here thinking, if that many people aren't raising their hands, maybe the problem isn't the hands. Is the real answer just to design for everyone from the start so declaration becomes less of a prerequisite for access?
Yes, I think designing for everyone is the goal. And what I feel there is shifting from a declaration dependent system where we're designing and addressing outliers. That's really the goal. Accommodations is a static, kind of reactive system, whereas inclusion is proactive, and then we just design best for everybody. So yeah, I would say that designing for everyone is the goal.
You mentioned masking, and I want to make sure our listeners have that framing because I think it's such a useful one. We're talking about the energy someone spends to just perform normalcy in a learning environment rather than actually learning. That's exhausting. What does intentional course design look like when the goal is to give people permission to just be in the work?
Yeah, masking is a huge issue. It's anxiety inducing and it's exhausting. These are two things that are the worst things that you can have for learning and a situation that is supportive for learning. So there are many things that you can do actually to help this situation. You can have asynchronous tools, so allowing people to have discussion boards and respond with recordings, for example. You can have explicit language at the beginning saying that people can turn in things at different times, and this is explicitly said at the very beginning. So these are important ways of structuring the courses that take away from performance and go to learning.
We are big fans over here at Moodle of the curb cut effect, which you talk about, the idea that designing for one group ends up benefiting everyone. In a digital learning environment, can you give me your favorite example of that? Something that was kind of built for accessibility and turned out to be just universally better?
Yeah, I love the curb cut effect too. I mean, I love it when you see on LinkedIn all of these examples of curb cuts and you're like, oh my God, I had no idea that came from this. Of course, I'm going to say text to speech. But I say that because I've actually lived the curb cut. So, ReadSpeaker, for example, was founded by a blind person and his friend that they were just trying to find a way for him to consume his university content better. So it was really about just the visually impaired. And then slowly it kind of morphed into assistive technology. So it was for dyslexia and people with learning disabilities. And then, and I've been on this journey, which has just been fascinating. And then has slowly come into a wider use for basically everybody. So we do see that these tools that were primarily for those with disabilities have just become support for everybody. That is the perfect example of the curb cut effect, I believe.
Okay, and let's talk about UDL, Universal Design for Learning. It gets referenced a lot, sometimes quite loosely. In your view, what does it actually look like in practice when it's applied and sort of specifically through a neuro-inclusive lens?
Yeah, so it's pretty much the perfect segue from the curb cut because it's really what universal design is about. It's about designing good design, and it just happens accessible design is good designs. Universal design for learning has been around for some years, started about in the 70s through CAST, and it's really based on neuroscience. And it's based on, and I love this because it's based on human variability. So it is really saying that the norm is variability. There is no norm, if you like. So then what we need to be doing is designing to that, not to designing accommodations or for outlying cases. And so the basis, I mean, it sounds very complicated, universal design for learning, but the root is just multiple means. So it's multiple means of expression, multiple means of understanding. It's about giving lots of different ways of consuming content or showing what you know or dealing with the content. So for example, you might have an assignment where you can listen to it. So this is great for dyslexics, for example, or it may be chunked down, or it should be chunked down in pieces so that somebody with ADHD, for example, and needs focus can read some of it, then can listen to some of it. So it's all about structuring it so that there are many ways of consuming the content.
I love that. I'm an avid reader. And I am constantly getting the audiobook and the physical book because sometimes I need just one or the other or both. It's really revolutionized how I consume the books all the time.
I think it's such a great concept, this concept of human variability. I just feel like it's so much more real and what we need right now, that and what's going to make us here we are with AI and all of that, right? This is actually what's going to make our strength is all of our variabilities and all of our differences. So yeah, I think it's a really great concept, universal design.
For sure. Now, you talked about giving learners agency in how they consume content. And I want to pull on that thread because I think For a lot of course designers, agency can feel like a nice idea that's hard to operationalize. What does it actually mean to hand that control over, and why does that matter so much?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that, you watch Netflix and you have agency in how you want to watch it. You can slow it down, you can stop it, you can have translation, you can have subtitles. So in entertainment, we have agency. Why not in learning, right? Agency is really important because it's really allowing the learner to own their learning and understand how they learn and support that. So it's important for metacognition. We know metacognition, or knowing how you learn, is an important foundation for learner success. But this also takes away any kind of anxiety. It takes away judgment. It takes away a lot of the things that are causing the learner to feel like they are not in a position to advocate for themselves or to be able to learn the way they need to learn. So, agency is very important. I do want to caveat that agency means a structured format. So it's not just, no holds bar, do whatever you want to do, it is within a structure. So that is the institution and the educator's responsibility to be giving that structure, but structure with agency in mind.
It's great. Okay, we're going to change gears a little bit. ReadSpeaker, of course, are a certified Moodle integration, as I mentioned at the start, and we think that certification matters. Can you speak to why kind of native feeling tools make a real difference? Because there's a version of accessibility where the accommodation itself stands out, and I imagine that's the opposite of what we want to see as a kind of learning experience.
Yeah, I mean, friction is the enemy of accessibility, right? So if anybody has to stop and download something or go to a different tool or whatever, they're probably not going to use it. If they do use it, it's made this huge bump in their learning journey. And then there's all sorts of stigma that comes. So it's just a mess when it's just like this tacked on tool. So that's really not a good option. The other thing is, for the educator, it's not a good option, right? Because here they've got this course and everything, and then they've got somebody who's got to go outside of the course and do all of this stuff. So when it's integrated, it just becomes part of the course. It becomes always on. It's I am getting help, not I'm asking for help. It's just there. You also have a situation where it kind of levels the playing field, where you don't have a stigma or any kind of judgment, because it's just there and available for everybody. Having it natively integrated is super important, and in all content. A lot of times if it's downloads, or it may work in one format but not in the other. The certified piece is very important too, because there are other things that you can find and download, but you really need to make sure that it's going to work, and it's going to work all the time, that it's not going to cause more problems. It's not going to cause more, customer support stuff. And, you need something that's just going to work. So when it's certified, it's been through testing. We know the quality. So, you get what you pay for. It's worth having something certified.
For sure. Kind of on that thread, I want to ask about the business case here, because I know a lot of people listening aren't making decisions for their organization in a vacuum. They've got to make a case upward. So, what does the data actually say? My hunch is that it's the right thing to do, gets you into the room, but the numbers gets the budget approved, right?
Yeah. And this is the part that I love, because this is where I see that both in education and all the way through the learning journey, somebody's learning journey, right? And all the way into corporate, and when they become, into a business, this is not about generosity of spirit. This is strategic. So the World Economic Forum did a job study where they know that creative thinking and AI skills and cybersecurity, all of these fields that are going to be important in the future for employment. And then, surprise surprise, you've got neurodivergence, which They just did a study on neuro-inclusion in work, and it was about 2,000 people over 22 countries. And surprise, surprise, we found that those people were overperforming by 30% in those fields. So we've got, this set of people, this talent pool. We're sitting on this talent pool. We've got this issue with this, the future and jobs and how are we going to do all this stuff. And it's the perfect situation. However, in that study that they did on neuroinclusion and work, they found that 39% of the people were planning on leaving their position because they weren't getting the support that they needed. So this is not now just a, ethical, we should be nice kind of, conversation. This is a strategic conversation. And like you were saying, Dan, this is going to be separate the wheat from the chaff as far as strategy and the companies that are really going to move forward and have a strategic human resource strategy. We're talking about 30% more profitable. Hewlett Packard did a study, 30% more profitable, the teams that were not neurodivergent. You've got the profit margins are better. The loyalty is better. I mean, the neurodivergent teams that are treated right. You've got NASA who actively looks for neurodivergent people, and they have something like 80% of their employees are neurodivergent because these are the skills that we need for tomorrow. And so I think this is the revolution. This is what I was saying. I think there's a revolution in education, and it matches what's happening with us historically now. So it's very exciting. But I think companies that can embrace this and figure this out, they're going to be the winners.
Yeah, and it's not just about the hiring decisions, right? It's great to be more inclusive in your hiring and more diverse in your sort of inviting people to the party. But once they're there, it's got to be the support that you provide has got to be inclusive. Otherwise,
right.
that talent just doesn't thrive.
That's right.
Okay, I've got another question. This one hits hard. I'm asking this selfishly on behalf of every exhausted course designer listening right now. If someone can only do one thing this week, what's the quick win? The change that they could make today that would actually move the needle for their organization and their learners?
I'm probably going to sound biased, but I would say text to speech, because text to speech hits so many text to speech with the accompanying tools, right? Because it hits so many of the pieces and it's a quick win. So, you've got different ways of taking in the content, you've got focus tools, you've got lots of different ways that you can make a difference immediately. But there are plenty of other ones. You can do things like you can replace one assessment that's a performance assessment. You can just turn it into a softer turn in, asynchronous. There are things that you can do. And I would suggest that it's really important to start today and not be worried about, oh my God, I have to have a whole plan and we have to start a whole thing. I mean, you can just start by changing, how you treat fonts or headings. There are lots of small things that can be done that make a huge difference. So a little bit goes a long way in accessibility.
Amy, I know a lot of people spend so much time getting things dialed in. I mean, course design, it's a labor of love. It's constantly evolving. Can you tell me a little bit about how long it takes to get up and running with ReadSpeaker?
This is one of the great things about the Moodle environment is that our plugin is really clean. It's fast to integrate. It's, a couple of hours, and it's really just a question of turning it on. We can set up trials as well very easily. So that's one of the reasons why I was saying it's an easy thing to do immediately to address accessibility and inclusion.
Can we also maybe drill into the notion of reporting? I know when I was in the trenches of course designing, we constantly had to showcase how effective our tools and strategies were. How can course designers who are using ReadSpeaker, tell that data narrative up the food chain, so to speak, to ensure that, continued success with the tool?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. And one of the strengths of ReadSpeaker is that we really work with the institutions that we work with to make sure that they have the solution that best fits their needs. That includes reporting. So, you can see how many listens there have been and what kind of courses are getting a lot of interaction. So we have a whole portal where you can see what's going on. You can also choose different languages. We have 280 voices and 80 plus languages that you can add. We have exam mode. So there's lots of ways that we can work with you. And that's one of the things that we really try to make sure that we take the time to work with the institution and make sure that they have exactly what is needed for their users and their educators.
Thank you very much, Amy. One final question for me. You folks at ReadSpeakers are amongst the hardest working people in the business. You're always out on the road. Where if people want to pick your brains on this, have you got events that you're going to be present at, either on the stands or speaking at over the coming months?
Oh, yeah. We're going to be in loads of places. You're right. We are hard workers. We are at several of the Moodle Moots. We're actually at Estonia right now, I believe, today. We're at Learning Technologies. We're going to be at several different moots around the world. So, yeah, we're going to be in a lot of places and would love to have conversations with everybody.
Amazing.
Is it fair to assume that wherever Moodle is at an event, ReadSpeaker is going to be there too?
We like hanging out with Moodle.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for helping us understand just the business advantage that's here for everybody trying to meet the challenges of our emerging workforce.
Yeah, it's
Thank
pretty
you for having
powerful.
me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, Charlotte. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
See ya.
I don't want to be yet.